Neptunia X Senran Kagura Ninja Wars is, as you would guess, a crossover game between Neptunia and Senran Kagura, the flagship series for Compile Heart and Idea Factory and Honey Parade and Marvelous respectively. And it's a crossover game that makes sense. The two series have a significant overlap in their fanbase, appeal to the same group of degenerates, and don't worry, I say that with love, and both series have reached a point now where, for better or worse, there's more spin-offs than mainline entries. For worse, it's definitely for worse. This spin-off, thankfully, isn't on the lower end of the spectrum, but it's quite far from being in the upper echelons as well. Being developed by Tamsoft, it plays more like the mainline Senran Kagura games or the spin-off game Hyperdimension Neptunia U Action Unleashed, also developed by Tamsoft, than it does any of the mainline Neptunia games. To start, let's take a brief look at the story. Thankfully, Nep X Sex avoids the trap too many crossovers fall into by lazily making a mysterious opponent suck the would-be heroes into some vague pocket dimension or alternate universe for the sake of Mortal Kombat or some other such crap. Rather, in this spin-off, the two already exist in the same world on an island called Game Ninjastry, and they have a long history of competition against one another. But one day, everything changed when the PC elitist nobody asked for opinions from, known in-universe as the Steam Legion, descend upon Game Ninjastry to assert their dominance. And so our adversarial ninja gals must put aside their differences, unite forces, and save Game Ninjastry from the threat of superior technology. That's about all anybody needs to know to start the adventure. Now, this story is told through visual novel scenes which make up the bulk of the campaign's runtime. So much so that if you took all of it out of the main story and only focused on the gameplay sections, this 10-hour adventure would likely only have 2 hours of gameplay. With my playthrough doing nearly all of the optional content and stopping 4 trophies away from platinum that would really only take another hour to get, I spent about 17 hours with the title. We'll talk more about how I got there later. Despite the visual novel content making up so much of the runtime, however, the plot does very little to develop. The writing has more of a Neptunia style than it does Senran Kagura, with a lot of meta dialogue and breaking the fourth wall stuff, and I do think that works to the game's benefit. But it often feels like these VN sections go on for a long time with nothing getting said. If you're into Neptunia primarily for the wit and comedy, I don't think you'll be disappointed with that aspect, but I do think they could have used a little less focus here and a little more elsewhere. As for the combat and gameplay, so gameplay is definitely in the Senran Kagura Musou Light vein of things. There won't be massive hordes of enemies filling your screen, but they're not one-on-one battles or anything either. You just wander through a series of rather lackluster corridors and arenas, battling creature spawns along the way, opening chests, and sometimes flipping a switch to progress. For combat, you have a very limited set of tools at your disposal. You have a block, a dodge, a standard attack, a ranged attack, a jump that really doesn't serve much battle use, a hot menu for performing special attacks, and another for enabling buffs. You can also swap out to a partner character on the fly. When they're in the partner slot, they will recover some of their HP. Most of this is self-explanatory, but some of it requires a deeper look, especially where it doesn't all work as fluidly as you might hope. So the buffs can be used 5 times per stage per character. These special attacks require an exchange of stamina from the meter down here, which you mostly charge through normal attacks. There is one other type of special attack that does not require stamina, but it requires you to charge a separate meter altogether. It takes a lot longer to charge, but it thankfully freezes enemies in their place while the attack unfolds. Your ranged attacks have a set number of uses determined by the weapon you've equipped, of which you take 2 projectile weapons into battle at a time. These are an infinite resource, but they will recharge in battle on a cooldown. The game also has an EXP and leveling mechanic, as well as a gem equip chart, which allows you some control over your build. The gems themselves come in a wide variety and can be combined to craft higher levels of the same gem type. It doesn't really make all that much difference in combat, but it's at least something. But looking at the problem areas now, combo ability is probably the biggest one,
which is probably why there's no combo counter in this game.
Where we only have one general attack button, your options are to combo that attack into your ranged attack or your specials. In regards to the ranged attacks, comboing into them does not feel good and often throws you far away from your enemy. In that case, it's best used in a combo as an escape method and nothing else. As for the special attacks, well, there's a lot to unpack with this one. While you can combo into specials specials just fine, you can't usually combo out of them aside from using another special. The lag time following a special attack's completion is generally far too long. Further, you can't block or dodge cancel from most special attacks. While this isn't an issue early on as you can just tank the hits you get in the meantime, in the late game it becomes a massive issue. For whatever reason, they made the decision to not make bosses staggerable. With some of your special attacks being long single button combo chains that might take 5 or more seconds to play out, not being able to stagger late game bosses who at that point can two-shot you discourages you from using your specials at all, which leaves you one method of recourse in the late game: your ranged weapons. As I said earlier, ranged weapons do not feel good to use in a combo, but also early game ranged weapons feel so weak you'll likely avoid using them altogether. Later into the game, your ranged weapons get perks where they throw multiple directions and many at a time per use, and they also do absurd amounts of damage. Couple this with the damage bonus you get from hitting enemies from behind, and late game most of your fighting will come down to circling behind enemies, keeping your distance, and chucking what you got, then waiting for cooldowns. Aside from the gradual change from ranged weapons being useless to them being OP and your melee being discouraged, there's not much evolution in combat from start to finish. You might be under the impression that switching characters should switch things up, and yeah, it does, I guess, to an extent, or at least technically speaking, but not to a large enough extent. Most of the characters feel kind of samey to use, and there's not exactly a large roster to choose from here, topping out at 10. Most of what will ultimately make these characters feel different to use is the difference between their stats and combo lag. While most of them have different weapons, I can't help but feel like they play rather similar. And this is something I think Tamsoft's previous effort with Udawari Ramono Zan done considerably better. That game also had a very small cast, but it didn't feel too small because the characters played so differently. Mind you, some of them played in ways I didn't enjoy using, but picking between different play styles is a much better choice than picking between combo lag times. So the bottom line is it fun? And like, yeah, for about 4 hours, I guess. The remaining 13, however, didn't do very much for me. If you're coming from a background where you've strictly played the Neptunia games and don't engage much with action combat games, you might get more out of this as some sort of intro to the genre. But if you're coming from a Senran Kagura background, while the series isn't exactly the leader of the pack or anything, you'll find this game at best lacking but potentially interesting. But combat in the main story isn't the only form of gameplay. There is a minigame in here as well to give you temporary stat bonuses when you go out on missions called Peaches and Cream Meditation. Basically, one of the ladies just sits on a giant peach in a pool of cream, and you use the gyro controls to keep her balanced. There's 3 levels of difficulty for higher bonuses, but like combat, it gets old really quick. Thankfully, the game gives you fast pass tickets, so you don't actually have to do it to get the bonuses, but if you're looking to get some of the achievements, you'll want to do it manually and with different characters every time. There's also Nin Chat, which is just a menu you bring up to chat to people between missions. Most of them will give you a one-liner and move on. Some might give you items or side quests which you complete in game instances separate from the main story, and others will launch full-on new visual novel segments, which the game absolutely didn't need more of, but for those of you who liked it, here you go, there's more. Now, those side quests I mentioned, I wish I could tell you they were good, but it's probably the thing the game handles the worst. So let's take a look at those now and why this 10-ish hour game took me 17 hours to complete. So you remember earlier me saying that this game was an RPG and the main story probably only had 2 hours of gameplay? Well, every story mission has a recommended minimum level that technically you could ignore and still win, but I wouldn't recommend. By the time you hit the final mission, they expect you to be about level 40. So how does one get to level 40 in 2 hours of gameplay? The short answer is, they don't. To get you to level 40, the game gives you a metric ton of optional side quests, and these side quests are boring. They all use the same stages and enemies you've seen in the main story, and they never have meaningful stories to accompany them, just objectives. The objectives, if I'm being generous, come in 6 forms. Kill the enemies on a timer, collect the items on a timer, flip the switches, and you guessed it, flip the switches on a timer. These kind of become brain-dead, mindless filler before even starting them, and they make up the majority of the actual gameplay. At least that's how I felt about it. Which might go a long ways to explaining how I felt even this very short game still managed to overstay its welcome. It sucks to say this, but the game's charm wore off quick for me and became quite the slog before it ended. But after it ended, more content unlocked, so of course I had to look at that too. After you beat the game, a new practice mode of sorts opens up that actually offers unique challenges. It's still the same enemies and same locations and technically the same objectives, but each mission here restricts your abilities in new ways that introduces a small degree of variety and new challenges that the normal side quests really could have benefited from. This mode in general is actually kind of ass, I'm not gonna lie, and I lost interest well before it unlocked, but the ideas they introduce here could have gone a long ways to improving the game in other areas. By the time you complete the game, you'll have the extras menu completely filled in as well, so if you'd like to see any of the old event CGs or the 2 movies again, you can. But on the note of the movies, they're really kind of disappointing. It's nothing against the quality of the animation or anything, but the 2 movies are literally the pre-menu sizzle reel and the end credits video. The main campaign itself has no actual cutscenes. Of course, with games like this, there's always dressing rooms and costumes and such too, and this game is certainly not no exception to that. By which, of course, I mean they ain't got no dang old character customization in this here video game, so that kind of blows. For those curious about fan service, I have no issue keeping you abreast of the situation. Though the titillation has been knockered down a few pegs, things like jiggle physics and panty shots still remain, as well as some revealing character designs and hot spring segments. The cups may not floweth over the way they used to, but it's not entirely absent as one may expect in #current year on #current console. But that about brings us to the final chapter of this review. So for technicals, the game looks how it looks. Character models and animations are well and good, but the environments suffer a fair degree. Plus her design is absolute cheeks. Wink at camera. I'm not on camera. For a budget action game, it also runs rather well, though you will see strange artifacting going on with some of the special effects during attacks. The game does control fine aside from the aforementioned decisions to not allow better block and dodge cancels, but that's just the way they wanted to make the game, and I guess it functions as intended. I wasn't too hot on some of the control mapping, but they do allow remapping in-game. The translation isn't hurting, the OST fits and sounds good, and the sound design does its job. The voiceovers, which are Japanese only, fit the bill, and the interface is pretty clean and readable. Really, there's nothing more to say. Actually, I guess one more thing. Menu options could have been looked into more deeply. For instance, when selecting a side quest to do, there's no way to just immediately switch out what characters you want to bring in or edit their loadouts. You need to back out of that menu, then open another menu and do a bit of menu juggling until you're ready. It could have been better, but yeah, that's about it. Overall, I will say it's a considerably better value than Senran Kagura Reflections or Peach Ball, but still a far cry from what it could, or rather should have been. Had they reconsidered a few of their ideas and rearranged where they used some of them, they could have made this much more enjoyable with very little extra effort. I think they also could have picked better characters for the roster. Characters that maybe don't all feel like they play the same, with the same basic ideas. Somebody like Katsuragi, for instance, who only fights with her feet, would have stood out a lot and offered a much more interesting method of combat. As they say, variety is the spice of variety. As it is, it feels like you see just about everything this game has to offer within 4 hours, and after that you just go through the motions hoping something will eventually take you off of autopilot, but nothing ever does. So, better though it may have been than some of the other spin-offs, this one is still not quite a winner for me. And it's hard to say who to recommend this to that probably didn't buy it already. I think if you're a fan of either franchise like me, you probably already bought it, and part of you will be happy to have just done your part supporting the future of these franchises. But it's hard for me to say the game's really good. It rides a very middling line for me, and to be honest, even now I can't tell if it sways to one side more than the other. It's competent enough, but ultimately rather uninteresting, which is one of the greatest sins of all. I personally would rather have an incompetent yet interesting game, but here we are. If you played it, let me know how you felt in the comments below. As for me, I'm gonna go finally dip into Blue Reflection 2 and hopefully bask in the coziness of its atmosphere until all the stress of having to sound negative on the interwebs melts away. I'm really not looking forward to seeing how many dislikes this video gets. Oh wait! Until next time, if you guys like the video or found it useful at all, you know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, and share the video if you can. Links to all of my socials, Twitter, Discord are in the description below, and as always folks, thanks for watching.